Welcome, everybody, to MSU and to the College of Education. It's a great privilege to be able to talk to you today. And with just 15 minutes, I'm just going to really throw some ideas out there that I hope, again, as Elizabeth said, you'll pick up on as we have discussion together, and definitely feel free to follow up on any of these. But in a session on induction and mentoring, I'm going to talk a little bit about the preparation of teachers, given some of what we know about induction and mentoring, and then a little bit of what we've learned as our teachers move out of our program into their first years of teaching. So some of the challenges that we think about as we think about preparing teachers to begin their teaching careers, we need to do this at a large scale, right? As Caroline mentioned, teaching is the largest profession in the country. So there are many, many teacher preparation programs preparing many, many teachers each year. At Michigan State, as Dean Heller mentioned, we graduate 400 to 500 interns per year. So thinking about what can we do to support these new teachers on this kind of scale is a question we think about a lot. Added to that, we then think about kind of the uncertainty and the constant changes in the context in which they will be teaching. So it is not the case that all 500 of those interns will be going to the same district to teach, of course, or even to similar districts, right? These teachers are essentially being prepared to teach anyone, anywhere. And given the large range, those of you who are out in schools and districts know that schools and districts vary widely. So how is it that we might prepare 500 teachers per year to teach in any one of these schools and districts? And then let's layer on top of that a challenge that there really is no reliable system, and I think Liam will probably talk about this some more, or requirements for teacher induction and mentoring in those schools and districts. So there's nothing, as those of us who prepare teachers in their initial teacher preparation, there's nothing we can rely on that we know for sure will happen to support those teachers as they move into their first teaching jobs. So given that, what is it that we really want to do in teacher preparation that we know they can take with them as they move into these new teaching jobs? So those are some of the challenges that we think about. We know some things about this, right? We've been doing this teacher preparation work for a long time. We've learned some things about what it takes to prepare teachers given these challenges. We know that learning to teach takes time, right? So given those challenges and given what we know about teacher learning, this is not something we can do quickly. There are lots of reasons why we might want to be able to do it quickly. It's cheaper. We need to get more and more teachers out there, but we can't. We know learning to teach takes time, but we also know that time is limited, right? Even in a program like ours, that's a 5-year program, we still feel like there's way more to do than we could possibly have time to do. So we have to think about what kinds of choices are we going to make given that time is limited. We know that learning to teach takes practice, right? We know that it is not just about sitting in a classroom hearing people talk about teaching. It's not just about reading about teaching. It's actually about practicing teaching, okay? But there's lots of questions about how you would do that, right? If we're going to do that in a classroom of children, then how do we do that responsibly so that those children continue to have the best opportunities possible to learn? If we're going to do that, we know you can't just practice all of it at once. So which pieces of practice do we think new teachers might most benefit from working on? We know that learning to teach requires deep knowledge of content. But the question is what content and when should they learn that content, right? We know that teachers who are teaching mathematics, whether it's kindergarten mathematics or calculus, need some deep understanding of math. But identifying what math and when they should learn it, and what they need to know about how children learn math, all of those are open questions for us. We know that learning to teach is complex, right? Anybody who's spent any time in classrooms or spent any time researching teaching knows that it's a very complicated and complex, complex work. But given all of these limitations, we need to figure out how do we simplify it so that new teachers can learn to do it, but simplify it in ways that are meaningful. Simplify it in ways that don't take away this complexity, but make it accessible for new teachers. So how do we do that? Finally, we know that learning to teach is about more than the development of a set of skills or knowledge, right? If there was a compact bucket of things that we know they needed to learn, we might be able to think differently about how to prepare teachers. But it's really about preparing professionals who are flexible, who are adaptable, who are leaders in the field. Right? And that's much more complicated than teaching somebody a list of skills or knowledge. So the question is, given that we know these things, given the constraints and challenges we faced on the first slide, how then do we think about best preparing and supporting new teachers? So in the Michigan State Teacher Preparation Program, we have many different ways of addressing this challenge, we have, as Dean Heller mentioned, a year-long internship, right? So many of those questions about time and context and practice, we can address through that year-long internship. We have efforts at induction and mentoring that are happening here in Detroit and in other places throughout Michigan. I'm going to leave a handout at the back table that tells you a little bit more about some of those efforts. We have global and urban cohort programs within our teacher preparation program that say, maybe it's not the best idea, and I think, and I hope Magdalene will talk a little bit about this, to prepare every teacher to teach everywhere to everyone. But maybe it would be helpful if some teachers specialize to teach in particular contexts, knowing that there's particular knowledge and skills that are needed for those contexts. So we have programs that work on that and that think about what would you really need to know to be able to teach a global population of students? What would you really need to know and be able to do to teach successfully in an urban district? We have, of course, alternative teacher preparation programs that take different tacks on some of those questions, that think about time and practice and context in slightly different ways. And we try those and we study those and we think about in what ways do those work better or less well than our traditional teacher preparation program. And of course, we work with partner schools and districts in many different ways to help us think about these questions and challenges. I'm going to dig in here for the next few minutes before I back out at the end of this talk about one example that I've been closely involved in, which is thinking about how we prepare teachers to teach elementary mathematics. This is a long-term collaboration with all of the colleagues up there, funded by the National Science Foundation. And the fundamental question we're asking is, how do we better prepare elementary teachers to teach mathematics to diverse groups of students in ways that support the development of children's mathematical thinking? So this is taking on another challenge that's underlying many of the ones that are here, which is also to say, those of us talked about at lunch, some of us, that our teachers are different in many ways from the students they teach, right? They're often different racially, they're different in terms of socioeconomic class, they're different in terms of geography, lots of different differences, and the children in front of them will be diverse from each other in many different ways. So the question is really, how do we prepare teachers to teach mathematics to a diverse group of children, knowing that every single teacher works with a diverse group of children, because all children are by definition diverse. More specifically, though, we're thinking about how do we prepare teachers to do the work we know is needed to teach elementary math, so building on children's thinking, posing high-level tasks, leading whole class discussions, while using what we would call mandated and often scripted curriculum materials. So we're taking one very particular question here, which is we're going to prepare teachers in the university to do a particular set of things, to work with children in particular ways, to ask high-level questions, to engage them in deep mathematics. But we know one of the first things we learned is that they'll go into schools where these kind of practices aren't always supported, right? Where often new teachers walk in, and many of you have probably seen this, new teachers walk into a classroom, they're handed a textbook and said, here, teach this, right? And if we haven't done the work of preparing them to do these high-level practices while using that curriculum, then we haven't done our job as teacher educators. Because it is not the case that we can place that burden on new teachers to say, in addition to all of the other things we are asking you to do that are brand new, to manage a classroom, to learn to show up at 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning and to work all night on grading papers. In addition to all of those things we're asking you to do, and by the way, if you're an elementary teacher, we want you to teach literacy, math, science, and social studies, sometimes also physical education, art, and music. In addition to all of that, figure out how to do something totally different than what we prepared you to do, because you've just been handed this book. So we've really thought hard about how do we actually prepare teachers for the realities of the classroom while holding on to what we think are best practices for teaching, right? So how do you help new teachers engage their students in high-level, rigorous content, in this case mathematics, while working under the constraints and contexts that we know are out there in teaching today. So I'm going to just introduce 3 ideas that we've pursued to support teachers to do this that we think have some promise, and that we would love if those of you who are out reporting in schools would be looking to see, are these things happening in schools? The one is really an orientation to both students and teachers, which is the importance of always framing this in terms of a strengths-based perspective on students at all levels and teachers at all levels, right? It's about what can your students do and what can you do as a teacher, no matter what those constraints are. So we think about who are the learners? What kinds of experiences have they had with mathematics? What are they bringing to your classroom? What are you bringing to your classroom? Right? What mathematical resources are available in the school and the community? It's often the case that the schools and communities that seem in some ways the most under-resourced to new teachers have the richest mathematical resources in them, right? Think about Detroit as an example, right? When you first come in as a new teacher, you might notice all the things that are not here, but look around and think about all the things that are here that you can leverage to teach mathematics. Think about the history and the museums and the music and the culture, right? Again, strengths-based perspective all around. Right? And then this question that I pose, what can we all do mathematically? So if I were a reporter going into a classroom and looking for these things, what would I look for? I would look to see our students and teachers making connections to the community and to their own lives. Right? Are students and teachers focusing on strengths? Are they talking about what they are able to do and not what they're not able to do? Right? Is everyone working at what in the reading world is called their just right level? Right? Is everyone working on something that they can work on, right? They have a way into, but is not so easy that they finished it in 30 seconds, right? Are they all working at that just right level that's providing just the right amount of challenge for those students? So how do teachers do that? Right? So one thing we think about is if you are handed this textbook and said, here, teach this in math, and teach this in literacy, and teach this in science, and maybe we won't teach social studies, but if we do, let's teach this. That's for Margaret. What do they do then, right? Open that book. Where are the spaces then for you to connect with your students, for you as a teacher to bring your agency into that curriculum? It's hard to find. If you've looked at a textbook, if you've looked at a teacher's guide, if we had more time, we would look through it, right? There are thousands of words and thousands of activities and more than any teacher or student could possibly do in a school year. So how do we take a step back, slow down, and figure out where are the spaces in there for you as a teacher to have agency, to connect to your students, to think about, again, what we can do together and not what we can't do. So we take those textbooks with teachers, and this is unusual. It actually is the case that in many teacher preparation programs, they never look at the textbooks, right, that they're going to be using out in the schools. This is fairly new in many programs, and to say, okay, let's look at that lesson. Let's think about what before I even launch the lesson, how could I connect to my children here? How could I figure out what they already know about this? How could I figure out what they've done before, right? Before I engage them in problem solving, right? Before I, the teacher, show them on the board how to solve this problem, can I give the children a chance to figure out for themselves how they would solve the problem, how to make sense of it? Again, I'm still doing what's in the textbook, but I'm just doing it a little bit differently. Right? Can I change the elements of a lesson around so that before I tell students how to solve a problem, they explain to me how they think about solving that problem? Okay? So if I were looking for some of this in a classroom, I would look for, again, how is the mathematics connected to students? Do students feel some ownership about the math? Are students actually talking about math? Right? You could go into many math classrooms and see students that don't even have the opportunity to talk about the math they're engaged in. Are teachers asking students why? And are students asking each other and the teacher why? Why does this work? Right? Why are we doing this? Why does this work? I often tell my prospective teachers before they leave my classroom, if there's one thing I want you to remember, because I know prospective teachers will only take a few things from their university preparation that they remember. Right? It's overwhelming. They'll only remember a few things. And if they can remember just one thing, make sure you're asking why. Every day, somebody should be asking why. Okay? So finally, and this connects to these first three, too, which is the importance of small changes. Again, I think it's irresponsible of us as teacher educators to tell new teachers, you need to go out and change the system right away. You need to go out and be the rebel in your school. Right? New teachers are not in the position to do that with everything else they're trying to manage. What they are in the position to do is make some very small changes that make a big difference for children's learning. Right? The ones we just talked about would be examples of that. Others that we use, and this is very specific, I thought I'd engage you in 30 seconds of a little bit of math here. But let's say the textbook you're using has this problem. This is from a 4th grade curriculum. A box holds 6 chocolate candies. How many boxes, oh, there's a typo, are needed to hold 134 chocolate candies? Right? So this is a problem designed to engage students in the question of 134 divided by 6. Okay, so fine problem. The thing is, 30 students in front of you in a 4th grade classroom, that's going to be a just right problem for a few of those students. And maybe some of those students have actually seen chocolate candies in a box, and so that will help them figure out that problem. There will guaranteed be some 4th graders in that room who will have no idea how to start, because 134 is too big of a number for them to even think about right now. And there will be others who look at that and can tell you the answer just like this. So this is not an interesting problem for them to engage in. So small changes, right? Rewrite this problem. Our class baked some cookies for the school bake sale, and maybe you just did that, right? We want to put some number of cookies in each bag. How many bags will we make, right? You can see in the middle, if 134 and 6 is the just right number combination for those students, they can do that. Some students need to engage with this as a question of 24 divided by 4, okay, because they're still thinking about what does division even mean, and they still need to get the counters out in front of them and move them around and think about that. Others need to think about 191 divided by 5, right, because that's kind of a tricky problem. That has a remainder, that has some, how do we make sense of that remainder? How do we work with these bigger numbers? Okay, very small changes that make a big difference for student learning. Okay, so if I were in a classroom, I would look for how are teachers and students using the materials? Are they just taking the books they've been handed and just using them as is? Or are they making small changes so that students can be working together but at different levels, with different numbers, with different tools? And what does the teacher know about each of his or her students in that room that would allow him or her to make very smart, small changes? Okay, so this was a very specific example from elementary math that I hope illustrates some of the bigger challenges we think about when we think about preparing teachers for any number of contexts with any number of constraints. And so I will hand over the floor, but I want to leave you with just a few questions that I think we all should be asking. Both those of us in teacher preparation, those of us who are researchers, those of us who are reporters, people in the public. Are we hearing the voices of teachers and teacher educators in research and reporting on education, and particularly in research and reporting on teacher preparation? Are we explicit enough about where, when, and how commercial interests and marketing are affecting education? Right? One of the complicated things about teaching teachers to work with textbooks is that the textbook industry is a huge industry, and there is lots of marketing and sales that comes along with those textbooks. So in addition to thinking about the content and the rigor and making small changes, we also have to think about how can you be a savvy consumer as a teacher, right? How do you make smart decisions in the face of a billion-dollar industry, right? Are teachers prepared to engage students in rigorous and relevant content across content areas? Again, the importance of why. If nothing else, ask why. Ask your students why. Are teacher evaluation systems accompanied by equally robust and well-funded teacher support systems? Right, this gets back to this idea of a strengths-based, not a deficit-based perspective on teachers. If we are evaluating them, we should be evaluating them to figure out what they do well and what they could do better with some support. And finally, most of us in this room have the privilege of dropping in and out of classrooms when we feel like it for our various purposes. Our teachers and students are there every day, all day, and they're required to be there. So I think the question we should always be asking is, are our schools the kinds of places where we would want to spend all day, every day? And if not, how can we help teachers to make them that kind of place, both for them and their students? So with that,